All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. This will be the first inaugural stream for what I'm hoping to make a little bit more common, but not going to really have too much of a format. Mostly just going to be winging it. So we're going to go over a couple of things here. One, we're just going to be talking about Sylvaneth today. That's just because it's the army that I happen to main. Just quick background, I started out Warhammer Age of Sigmar purely as a Dungeons and Dragons enthusiast. I really just joined the hobby because I thought the models were cool. I thought it'd be an easy way to get some extra unique models into my range to have for my players. I bought a Cities of Sigmar box. Back then it was just Greywater Fastness, start collecting, and it just took off from there. Since then, I started a Seraphon army, was my first army. And then I just happened to pick up a Sylvaneth army, kind of just as passing by, couldn't pass up on that kind of deal. And I've been playing it ever since. So I'm by no means a expert. I don't perform extremely well at tournaments or anything. I don't have the chance to go to a lot of them, but I do feel like I have some unique insights, providing some analysis to the game, given my background, both academically and professionally. I was a military intelligence analyst and military intelligence officer. So the basis here is I sort of break things down somewhat methodically, academically, and use that lens to kind of look at things. So I'll be using some terminology. I'll try to explain it as I go along. But with some of that background information out of the way, we'll go ahead and get into it. So we'll talk about Sylvaneth to start out. So I have a couple of primary archetypes that I build my lists around. And anytime I'm building a list, I have to ask myself the question, how will this score points? Because that's ultimately how you win the game. I think there's something to be said about narrative play, about just playing the things that you like. But if you are trying to win the game, then you do need to score points. And there are two basic methods to do that. Scoring primary points and scoring secondary points by achieving battle tactics. So Sylvaneth inherently, just by the way the army operates, is not a great primary objective player in a lot of maps, because a lot of maps and a lot of these battle packs for competitive events are going to have 3-4 objectives in most of the maps. And then you'll really see once there's 5+ or even up to 8 objectives, Sylvaneth can really shine there. So what Sylvaneth is quite good at is scoring secondary battle tactics because they have exceptional mobility and a lot of ways to deceive your opponent into overcommitting on a specific flank or into something that you are able to teleport away and just make them commit more of their resources than they need to and put themselves into a vulnerable position that you can ultimately exploit. So we're going to go over two concepts. The first one is focused on hypermobility, and the second one is more of a counterpunch list that is disincentivizing interaction and punishing interaction. Excuse me. So the first list, and this is going to be the most common list that you're going to see in the competitive scene in terms of Sylvaneth, is going to be that hypermobile one with a lot of emphasis on the monsters. So the battle regiment, the battle formation is Lords of the Clan, which means all the monsters are going to be healing flat 3 at the end of each turn. Sylvaneth, just by nature of their battle traits, heals at the end of each turn if they're holding within a certain distance of an Awakened Wildwood or applicable terrain feature, Endless Spell. There's a few other ways to get around it. So this list is going to emphasize monsters and really capitalizing on that deceiving durability that they're just going to be constantly springing back and growing. growing back to their full hit points. So the bread and butter of this list is Illyria the Everqueen, the goddess of life herself. She's going to be the general in this regiment with Kurnoth Greatbows, reinforced unit. So the reason here to have this in the general's regiment, one, you always need to be thinking about denying battle tactics. One of the battle tactics that is accessible to everybody is slay the tyrants. So that's going to be kill a unit in your general's regiment. We're limiting this to as few units as possible, but also having at least one other unit besides our general so we can benefit from some of the season rules. So let's walk through a couple of things. Illyria general in general is a good choice to be your general because she is hard to kill. She has 16 wounds on a 3-up save, 6-up ward, but what really makes her difficult to put down is that she's going to be healing, has the option to heal 2d3 at the beginning of each hero phase. And she's also going to be healing flat 3 if she's close enough to terrain. So if you do the math, that's anywhere from 5 up to 9 wounds at the end of each turn or throughout the course of each turn. So if you can't get her down in one swing, she's likely going to come back with a vengeance. She's also a pretty potent spellcaster and does pretty significant damage in combat as well. The reason I included the Greatbows in here is so I can benefit from the season rule. Initially, this was a very common choice for priority targets, so they could get +1 to hit and to wound at an 18-inch range, and the ability to ignore the guarded hero rule made this a pretty fantastic choice. I still think there's some play into it, even though the rules changed at the time of recording to reducing that bonus to only if it's targeting certain units in the general's regiment and within 12 inches as opposed to the full range that's available to them. But it's still a pretty good choice. It's still something that is available to you if the need arises. These are particularly good into heroes, to include stuff like Gargants. And also gives you an option to achieve a pretty easy battle tactic for it's the order battle tactic to kill a hero or to use it for slay the tyrants should the ability arise there. So in addition, if that is not favorable in the matchup that you're in, you can also use them to bubble wrap Illyria, be wholly within 6, which is very easy with being a relatively small footprint unit, and with Illyria being such a large base herself to reduce tax incoming into her. There are no slouches in melee combat either, so it can be really punishing to an opponent that does undercommit forces there. So that's my logic in that first regiment there. We do have 2 more regiments. This is mostly just because a lot of the monster heroes in Sylvaneth are generally worth taking, with an exception of a couple. Here we're going to also take Belthanos, which is going to be in most lists, just because Run and Charge is such an exceptional ability. It's mostly about making movement, creating opportunities for you to score battle tactics or get a better board position. Try to avoid thinking of charging as just a means to deliver damage. It's important, at least in terms of this list, to be using it to position your forces or to complete battle tactics. So things like do not waver, or getting on to attack on 2 fronts to get onto a second objective that your opponent may think is way out there and not an option is pretty exceptional when you have these very fast-moving flying hero model units that can also run and charge with certain orders, getting them out to exceptional threat ranges on top of their teleporting capabilities that they have. So that's the primary reason for taking Belthanos. He's not a slouch in combat by himself at all. And also really important pointing out here, the Belthanos kickflip is what people lovingly refer to his monstrous rampage in each combat. On a D3 2-up, he can pick himself up out of that combat, inflict some mortal wounds according to the roll that he just made, and then place himself back in combat, but at least, or at most, an inch away from a unit. So if you can position it in such a way, in the future, I'm also going to be using diagrams to kind of illustrate these things, but it's an easy way where you can hop over a unit and get into an objective or a more juicy unit to do some damage or disrupt your opponent, lock them in combat with a unit they can't shoot in combat, that sort of thing. So another really useful tool. Belthanos is alone in that regiment, and then we have our third and final regiment, which is the Spirited Dirthu with 2 Gossamet archers. Spirited Dirthu is, in and of himself, a major beat stick. He can be very susceptible to variance just because he has a pretty limited number of attacks. But those attacks hit very hard, especially into monsters. He's going to be doing Ren 3, damage 5. It can quickly put down some major threats, especially if they're monsters. A couple of things to point out here. I've chosen for his command trait to be Warsinger, so he can give either himself or somebody around him a little bit of extra movement. This complements really well with Belthanos to be able to run and charge. For example, if you position it, you can give it to either Dirthu or to Alariel to get an extra couple of inches. With a auto run, just makes it pretty much adding 8 inches to your movement, which is making those big 9-10 inch charges just down to very manageable amounts, which is pretty exceptional. And then some of the kind of unsung heroes here are the Gossamet Archer units. These can be pretty tricky to play with, and they can be kind of underwhelming. You probably have a lot of folks that are very used to taking Tree Revenants, but since these Tree Revenants are no longer able to teleport multiple times if you take multiple units, a lot of times it's maybe not worth taking more than one of them. I've been opting lately to have Gossamet Archers because they do still have really exceptional mobility in that they can just, by nature of their War Scroll, move 12 inches. And then after they shoot, they can move an additional D6. In most of these battle plans, you should always be measuring out how far do I have to move something in order to achieve something like take the flanks, take their land on a given map, and do any of my units have the ability to do that without a command, without spending a precious resource. And the Gossamet Archers are good to have as an option for that. So the Gossamet Archers are there to predominantly achieve battle tactics, but if I need to use them as sort of an emergency screening unit, they're fantastic at that as well, because you can ultimately redeploy 2 of them in the sense that you can counter shoot with one and redeploy with another, and they'll both move a d6 because of their War Scroll and the nature of that command. So they're also going to be there for take their lands, the achieve 4 corners 6 inches away from units, reclaim the realms, battle tactic for order. So that is that first list. And like I was kind of outlining when I was going through that list, this is the sort of battle tactics, the sort of things I ask myself. What can I do? What are my options? What capabilities do I have within the army list that I've created? And then when I deploy, I'm trying to deploy in such a way that I can achieve those without regard to how my opponent might react. Because there's so many things. The enemy always gets a vote is a very common phrase. What happens when they deploy in a way you don't expect? What happens when they give you the first turn and you expect it to go second? That sort of thing. So creating a list that is indifferent to how your opponent decides to move, to react, is kind of the goal here. And that's what this list is seeking to achieve. Next, we have another list that's focused on taking a lot of the cheap, undercosted monsters that are not taken in a lot of Sylvaneth lists, at least in the competitive sense right now, which incidentally are very good when they are charged. And there are also a few options for strikes first, strike last opportunities that this list is going to be focused on. So this is more about establishing sort of beachheads on the battlefield and still having a couple of mobile units that we can achieve our battle tactics with, and kind of start a clock for our opponent to have to commit their forces and hopefully make a mistake and ride those dice. I mean, this is probably a little less dependable, I would say, maybe a little less competitive, because it is just going to be inherently dependent on some of those strikes first and strike last. This list is written in such a way that you get a couple of bites of the apple, but we'll get into that in a minute. So first, this is going to be an extra, or it's going to be, 3 regiments, just like our previous one. So it's giving us an option to potentially get an additional benefit from the season rule, but we'll get to that. So in our General's Regiment is going to be a Tree Lord Ancient and the Kurnoth Hunters with Scythes. So the Tree Lord Ancient is kind of a middling war scroll in and of itself. It's kind of in a position where it's not great at any one job of being a monster, being a wizard, but it's pretty good at both of those. And it's at a point cost where it's potentially justifiable. The biggest, most interesting thing here is you can hand out a Fights Last to something in the combat phase on a 4-up. So coupling this with the Scythes, much like we were coupling the Kurnoth Hunters with bows, with Alariel in the previous list, is there to give us a couple of options to either improve the rend if we're charging into something, whether that be infantry, monsters, cavalry, whatever we're going up against, but also to give a sort of less of an incentive to our opponent if we choose the bodyguard to bubble wrap our Tree Lord Ancient and make it even less appetizing to come into us, because that's the whole thing with these two units here, both the Tree Lord Ancient and the Scythes. They have anti-charge capabilities, and the Kurnoth Scythes are also going to be doing mortals, reflecting when they get charged. So you sit them around the Tree Lord Ancient, you hope for that 4-up, and if they do, man, that was a bad day for whatever charges into them. Next is the Branch Witch. Like I was saying earlier, this is what gives us a potential additional opportunity, or to even better yet, use that opportunity to hand out her Strikes First capability to another unit, so you can get multiple activations potentially before your opponent even has a chance to swing. So the Branch Witch, her main thing is going to be doing a little bit of spell casting and handing out that Strikes First. I would recommend keeping her, absolutely within the given range, depending on how many terrain pieces of Awakened Wildwood you have out on the field to achieve that Fights First. But better yet, because of the preeminence of stuff that can ignore guarded hero stuff like the Stormcast Eternals, even other Kurnoth Hunters with bows, putting her into obscuring terrain or even an Awakened Wildwood in certain circumstances is probably justifiable. But along with her, we're going to have a unit of Reinforced Dryads. This is mostly because I'm tinkering with a Highlander list, trying to not take redundant units. It's probably better if you take multiple minimum strength units of Dryads. But like I said, she's going to be positioned in such a way so she can influence over here with the Tree Lord Ancient and Kurnoth Scythe kind of bundle we have. She'll be here so she can influence that sphere, wholly within 12, for example, or the other flank where we're going to be committing the rest of the list with her Strikes First, should the opportunity arise. In addition, in this regiment, besides the Branch Witch and Dryads, we're going to have a unit of Gossamer Archers for the same reasons we identified in the previous list. Then finally, in the final regiment, we have a Tree Lord. If we do have more regiments than our opponent, then we'll potentially use Prize Beast here. There's not a whole lot of opportunities in our faction pack for these additional rules. So if you can create an opportunity, great. But if not, it's also just another good anti-charge piece. They're going to be reducing the opponent's capacity to wound on a 3-up in each combat phase. Their shooting can reduce, retreating and charging. So stuff like the Knights, in fact, kind of running amok in the meta right now. Just reducing their ability to retreat, run, that sort of thing can be pretty exceptional. We also have a unit of Kurnoth Reinforced Great Bows. Again, same access to battle tactics, good chip damage, great into heroes. A unit of Spite Rider Lancers. We're taking these, again, for sort of, objective monkeys, being able to perform stuff like take their lands, take the flanks, just mobile 12-inch movers that also are going to bring a little bit of later combat power that can complement whatever is still alive, mostly because these guys have a Strikes First on a 3-up when they charge. So we can kind of sequence that with whatever else we are able to get off with our dice rolls to amplify the damage we create. And then with our remaining points, we got Spite Revenants, kind of just utility, either being as a screen or serving as a little bit of more damage, or just achieving, staying within a certain quadrant to achieve a battle tactic late game. Just whatever you need for them is kind of the idea. The more optimal version of this list would probably have multiple small units of Dryads instead of a reinforced unit of Dryads and Spite Revenants. But again, I'm just looking for that Highlander format. So those are the two lists here. They're mostly the same in the way that they achieve battle tactics. They depend on a couple of highly mobile units to achieve the kind of spatial ones that are available to order, and just in this season faction pack, or in this season's General's Handbook for battle tactics. And the main reason or the main way in which they differ and achieve victory is the first one is through mobility, and the other was through creating a really bad situation for your opponent, kind of a dilemma of, do I go into these guys? If I do, I have a really good chance that I'm not even going to get a swing at them. And, even if they don't, they have quite a bit of ways to punish you for going into them. So those are those two list reviews. These are kind of the two that I see in a lot of the competitive postings for Sylvaneth. So it's just a good way to sort of get an idea of what is out there in the competitive scene, and an idea of how you can play against it, or if you're a fellow tree player yourself, maybe some things you can try yourself. But I'd love to hear what you think of these lists, what you think of Sylvaneth, what you think about the meta, or just what you think about your army as well. I'm just happy to answer any questions, hear any comments. But that's going to be it for today. Appreciate y'all. Take care.